Hi guys, Matt Easton here. So first up I should just say apologies to everybody for not putting up any more videos in the last couple of days. I've been a bit ill unfortunately, and so has lots of other people in my family. So I've been a mixture of looking after ill people and being ill myself. But I'm just starting to get back in the swing of things now, so there should be some more videos coming up over the next few days on various topics. As always, I have a growing to-do list, so thanks for all of you who've been suggesting topics to do. So one hopefully short topic, which is something that actually came up in the comments to one of my archery related videos, and that is the subject of using arrows as a stabby thing in your hand, in other words as a dagger. Okay, now this is something that particularly in the last kind of decade or less, I would say even 5 to 10 years, has been used, I would say overused, in a number of movies, obviously most famously Legolas in Lord of the Rings, but using an arrow as a stabbing implement. Can this be done? Well, yes, fundamentally you could stab someone with anything. You could use a knitting needle or a pencil or a biro or a stick, okay? So clearly an arrow is a stick. Being more than just a stick, it is actually usually made, most wooden arrows these days are made of cedar, which is an American wood. Traditionally they were usually made of, in Europe at least, made of ash. Ash and cedar are relatively flexible, and of course an arrow has to be relatively flexible because there's a phenomenon which a lot of you will probably know about, that when you shoot an arrow a lot of force is suddenly exerted at the back end and the arrow actually has to travel around the bow. Okay, so the flex in the arrow shaft is necessary for the arrow to successfully get around the bow without snapping, and indeed to then resume a straight flight in the right direction afterwards. This is a topic that's actually a little bit more complex than I've just explained, that I might go into in a future video if I can get my head around all of the physics involved. But fundamentally an arrow is tougher than an average stick that you'll find, in that it is particularly chosen to be a tough wood for its size and diameter. However, an average arrow, and this is a target arrow made of, I think this is cedar, this one actually, and this is made for using with kind of 60 to 80 pound draw weight bows. So they're not super heavy bows, they're kind of on the edge of what you might call war bows. War bow, this is a relatively modern term to differentiate between bows of a poundage that is suitable for warfare as opposed to lighter bows which are suitable for hunting or recreation. And generally speaking, most people I think would say that war bows have a draw weight of above sort of 75 pound draw weight, something like that, which incidentally is about on the edge of what I can comfortably shoot. I used to shoot, in fact I have a 90 pound yew longbow, war bow, but because I haven't been practicing archery for the last few years, I struggle to shoot my 90 pound bow. I usually, if I do ever pick up a bow these days, it's usually only a 60 or 70 pound bow. That difference between sort of 60 or 70 pounds and 90 pounds is actually quite a big jump. And if you're out of practice, if you're not training those particular muscles regularly, then you do kind of struggle to pull the top weights anymore. So going back to the subject of the arrow, this is a relatively, in terms of say medieval European arrows, this is relatively narrow. A lot of medieval European longbow arrows were actually up to ½ an inch thick. Reason being that you're supporting a very heavy bodkin point usually, or a sort of modified or hybrid bodkin broadhead, like the Type 16 point that I showed in my previous video, and of course you're using a very heavy bow. Medieval longbows in England in the 15th, 16th century probably, and this is all based on estimation, based on the Mary Rose bows and various other factors, but the draw weight probably varied for the most part between about 90 pounds and probably about 140 pounds. There undoubtedly were heavier bows than that, and indeed of course lighter bows used for hunting. But warbow range in England seems to probably have been around 110, 120 pounds draw weight, which for a modern person, anybody who does archery out there, you'll know that's pretty heavy draw weight. You need to be training pretty regularly to be able to pull that sort of draw weight and shoot successfully with it. And it's not just about pulling the weight, of course, it's about drawing the weight, aiming and shooting. So there's a lot more than just pulling the weight. You actually have to be able to manage the weight as well. So could you use a medieval or you know, even Renaissance or ancient period arrow as a stabbing implement? Well, yes, you could. You could use anything as a stabbing implement. However, my main issue with it is that most arrows are actually not very strong. For those of you who've ever done field archery or indeed bow hunting, you'll know and you'll be able to confirm that often when an arrow hits a tree, it snaps. Okay, usually when an arrow goes into a tree, it usually goes in about, well, it depends what type of wood it is, of course, but usually goes in kind of an inch or two deep, stops, and all of that energy has to go somewhere, and what happens is the shaft bends and snaps. Now, the problem with using an arrow as a stabbing implement is you're going to get the same phenomenon. Obviously, people's bodies are not as hard as trees, not usually anyway. I know some of you might claim otherwise, but if you're stabbing a body, and of course that body's moving around and, you know, maybe trying to avoid or turn or all of these kind of things, as soon as your arrow goes into them, you run a very large risk of them turning or dropping or something else and then just snapping the arrow off. So in many cases, yes, you could ram the arrow into someone, but it might snap on the way in, and indeed it will probably be quite rare that you could stab into someone and then get the arrow out again without it somewhere along the line snapping, you know, them falling or turning or whatever. So my main objection to it in movies really is that people stab someone with an arrow, then sort of knock the arrow, draw it and successfully shoot it. The chances of being able to do that are incredibly slim. I won't say it's impossible, because of course very few things are impossible in this kind of context, but it is very, very unlikely that you'll successfully be able to stab someone with an arrow and it stay in one piece. Arrows are not particularly strong objects, and they are only really designed to be strong when they're flying through the air like a bullet and then hit something. Okay? After they've hit the thing, it kind of doesn't matter. They're kind of disposable after that. They're not designed to be multi-use objects. So there we go, a fairly light touch on the topic. I don't have a huge problem with something like an arrow being used as a stabbing implement, but I think it's quite unrealistic when they are shown to be used as a sort of repeated use stabbing implement, because arrows are not strong. And I guarantee you, I don't want to risk this because this is one of my quite nice traditionally made arrows, but I guarantee you that I won't have to apply very much force at all, like that, to snap this arrow, despite the fact that this is made to be used with, and I have shot these arrows out of my 90-pound warbow. Although this can take 90 pounds of push and fly 250 to 300 yards and hit things very hard, it's very easy to snap laterally. Okay, so there we go, arrows, quite fragile. Cheers.